Welcome to this. Today I was going to do my best books of 2019 video, but instead I'm not going to do that because I live by my whims and I do what I want. So instead of talking about the old, the past, we're gonna talk about the new, next year. What are my plans? What are we doing? Right? I talked about this a little bit in my goals video, but I think it's obvious to anyone who's watched my goals video that I had no idea what I was talking about when I made that one. So, I've had thoughts. I have had thoughts, and now we are going to deal with those thoughts. Here we go. So, this video is called my Goodreads Want to Read project, and it is, funnily enough, about my want to read list on the Goodreads. My Goodreads Want to Read shelf is useless to me. It is bloated and disorganized and full of stuff that I don't actually want to read anymore. I started my Goodreads account back in 2012, which is 8 years ago, and in those years I have made it all the way through college, and no, 8 years ago. Yeah, I think I started my Goodreads the December that I started college. So I have graduated college, I have made it to grad school, and my reading tastes have changed. I have changed. I want my Goodreads Want to Read list to reflect what I actually want to read. I want it to be something that I can, like, go and look at when I'm feeling like I don't know what book to turn to next, and to have things on it that I actually want to read, instead of opening my Goodreads account and opening to that page and seeing the same, like, the beginning of that list has been the exact same books since I added them to the list 8 years ago, and I haven't read any of them, and I don't want to read some of them anymore. You know, I want this list to be somewhere I can go and consult if I'm going to the library or a bookstore, and to have what I actually want to read on it, instead of a dumping ground where I throw anything that glitters on Goodreads and then never look at it again, because it's so full of things that it's impossible to organize, right? This is supposed to be an organizational tool, but it can only be an organizational tool if it includes losing the words. It can only be an organizational tool if the list does not have extraneous, unnecessary stuff in it. And that's what this is meant to address. Therefore, the Goodreads Want to Read project that I am starting, we're starting from the beginning of the list, and I'm going to read my way through the list, deciding whether I want to read it or take it off the list. I'm essentially culling it down, getting it back to a place where it's manageable. That is the plan. I've decided that this is what I want to do with this year because my physical TBR, as you can see on, my physical TBR is quite honestly like this over on this shelf, just this top shelf, because when I moved across the country for graduate school, I did not want to ship my entire library, so I only shipped a very small part of my library, and so I have a very small physical TBR here, which feels very manageable and is very good for my brain. My Goodreads Want to Read list currently sits at 319, I think? Which is not good for my brain in terms of using it as an organizational tool, of figuring out what I actually want to read, of like even knowing what's on the list. Especially it's just 8 years of accumulation that has very little decumulation? Yes, so we're going to start at the top of the list, things from December 2012. And work our way through. I've decided each month, and we'll see if I keep this up, because as we all know, I'm terrible at goals, but I've decided each month we're going to tackle 10 books on the list. And I've made the number that high, not because I expect to read 10 books in the month, but because I kind of expect that when I'm going through this, I'm going to figure out that I don't actually want to read these anymore. And so this is me figuring out whether I actually want to read it or whether I don't want to anymore, and just not even starting it. Like, not even DNFing it, because I never started it to begin with. I just took it off the list. Oh, the other thing that we're doing, as a minor caveat, is that if I have the book in my physical TBR, but it's in my physical TBR back at my parents' house and is not here, we're just gonna skip it. Like, that just, it automatically gets to stay on the list, and it's gonna stay at my parents' house, because I don't want to deal with that. And I get to make the rules. So, we're skipping those ones, basically. Another caveat, so we're talking about this. My Goodreads want to read list, as it sits right now, has 319 books on it. And this is actually a significant decrease, because at the beginning of 2020, when I looked at my Goodreads want to read list, I was at 360. So I have already done some preliminary work just going through the first, like, 6 pages and saying, do I even want to read this anymore? There were a lot that I was going through, and I already knew, like, I was gonna say, no, I don't feel like reading that anymore. There were others that I saw, and I was like, I don't even know what that's about. And those ones I skipped, because like, on the one hand, you could argue that if you don't even know what something is about anymore, how can you want to read it? But on the other hand, I wanted to read it at some point, for some reason, and I'd like to make an informed decision on whether or not I want to read it, instead of just consigning things to the abyss of me not wanting to read it anymore willy-nilly. So I kind of skipped those, which is why this process still includes a significant amount of, do I even want to read this anymore? Because I don't know, right? Like, I don't know. We'll see. So, yes, that's the introduction to this project. Let us head back in time, circa December 2012, and see what my 10 books for January are, and if I know anything right off the bat about which of these 10 books I am going to read, and which I am not going to read. A pen on the floor next to me, I'm a genius. I already anticipated needing a pen for this, except I didn't. It was just here because I'm a mess sometimes. So, here are the 10 books that I'm going to be deciding on this month and trying to read or decide not to read. Here we go. This is kind of like a TBR video. It's also kind of like those, like, it's related to a TBR video, but it's not exactly a TBR video because, like, I'm intending to read these things, but it's like a historical version of that, of, like, my own personal history. That's a tangent for another day. Without any further ado, the 10 books that I am going to read or take off my list in January. I don't have enough information in my notes. I need... So, here's the top 10 books in order. The first one is The Witch's Daughter by Paula Braxton. This one, I'll have you know at this point that most of these at the beginning of the list I have actually clicked through and reread the synopsis because I'm a responsible booktuber or whatever. So, The Witch's Daughter by Paula Braxton is one of those books that takes place in the present and the past. And it is about a woman who was coming into her witchery in, like, the 1700s, and now in the future she is teaching another girl about witchery and things like that. It looks like a fun time. I like witches. I don't necessarily love things set in, like, colonial America, but we'll see how it goes. I expect I'm probably gonna try to read that one. The next one on the list is The Ghostwriter by John Harwood. This book seems like it's a horror novel of sorts. It kind of reminds me, synopsis-wise, of The Hazelwood. That's what it's called, right? That book that came out last year about this woman whose grandmother wrote fairy tales about the woods, and, you know, she found out that they were true, and that kind of thing. Like, it reminds me of that. The description of this one is that the great-grandmother wrote ghost stories in the 1890s, and now great-grandson finds a manuscript from them, and his mother is, like, super against it, and, you know, ever-present invisible threats and things like that. So it's another one of those kinds of stories. I don't know. Like, I'm down for that kind of thing, but I'm also, like, I don't know if I'm gonna be in the mood for, like, ghost stories in January, because it's January, and that's kind of, you know, an October, November feel for me, usually, for most people, usually, but we'll see how it goes. That one's on the list. Third one is Evernight by Claudia Gray. This is a young adult paranormal romance from the early to mid 2000s, so this is not something that I tend to read very much anymore, and it's also not something that tends to get written very much anymore, because that subgenre kind of died a little bit. Like, you don't really see this kind of story anymore. I wanted to read this at one point, so we'll see if I find that mood. Okay, so then the next on the list is Shatterglass by Tamara Pierce. This book is this is number 4 in The Circle Opens, which is a sequel series to The Circle of Magic. I'm probably not going to read this one this month, not because I don't want to read it, but because this is a series I'm actively collecting all of Tamara Pierce's works because I want them. And I don't have this series yet. And also it's number 4 in the series, so I don't know why it's on my want to read list before number 1, 2, and 3, because I know I don't own any of this series yet. But yeah, so that one's on this list, but I'm probably not going to read it this month for reasons I have stated. The next one is The Recruit by Robert Muchamore. This was clearly from my teenage spies phase, which is a phase that has never ended, really. If it is a book and it is about teens who are spies, I am probably interested. Let's just put that right out there right now, specifically if they're lady spies. This one's not about lady spies. Yeah, it's about some teen who gets recruited. It's kind of like the Alex Rider series, as far as I can tell, which I was a great fan of in my past. So I could very well read that one. I'm still interested in that for sure. Next on the list we have a classic, first classic on my want to read list that I made when I was a freshman in college. This one is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Honestly, I think the only reason that it's still on this list is because it's a classic, and I feel like I should read it because I should know things, but I don't know. I don't know a whole lot about Dorian Gray, and I kind of don't know if I'm in the mood for that nonsense, or if I'll ever be in the mood for that nonsense, considering I put this on my TBR 8 years ago and haven't read it yet. The last two on this list are Wild Magic and Wolf Speaker from Tamara Pierce's The Immortal series. They're actually book 1 and 2 in the series, and in order to read them, I have to acquire them. Because, like I said, I'm collecting all of her works, which means I have to find them. So I don't know if that's something that's going to happen this month. But because this one is 1 and 2 in that particular series, I could very well start them and do that and, you know, have that be a thing that I do. Unlike the other one, which is book 4 in a series that I have not started, so, like, why in all heck is it that high up on the food chain of my want to read list? Nobody knows. Nobody knows, really. It doesn't make sense. That's all of the things. I will check back in the future on whether or not I decide to read these and how I feel about them. Have a good, life and stuff. Bye.